Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 39 of Tour of Japan, the review series of course for the Super GT machines of Gran Turismo, both GT300 and GT500 class. And in this episode we're featuring a pretty unique vehicle, and a pretty special vehicle in some ways as well. This is the Team C-West Razo Silvia. Now this is based on the S15 shaped Silvia, and it's the only Silvia Super GT car that's currently featured on the game. So immediately, it's a unique vehicle. That said, what does this particular vehicle have to offer? Because sometimes the one-off models, such as the Celica GT300 car, the MRS GT300 car and the like, can have some pretty unique advantages. Usually in terms of value for money, because they tend to be significantly cheaper than the more obvious choices of GT300 and GT500 car. This car is definitely one of those vehicles, and in fact this is actually the most affordable Super GT car in the game. It is ridiculously cheap, not only for a Super GT car, but for a racing car of its spec in general. This car is surprisingly cheap. This is a 75,000 credit car, making it by far the cheapest Super GT car in the game. The next closest thing, I believe, if I remember correctly, is the Celica or MRS at 200,000 apiece. So this car significantly undercuts all of the other GT300 and GT500 cars for sheer price. Now, for such a low price, to be fair, regardless of its spec, it's bound to be good value even if it's slow. But as it happens, it's not slow. It's a very good car. Now, it's powered by a 2.1 litre engine, it's GT300 class, and it produces 590 horsepower fully tuned, and interestingly, it also produces 573 pound-feet of torque, which is more than a GT500 NSX. Pretty impressive for such a cheap car. It weighs in at 1150 kilos, which puts it on around the same level as most of the other Super GT cars, and it sits at a PP of 587, so not the highest, but not the lowest either. It produces 513 horsepower per tonne, which is pretty good for its power. And there's that price, which we have to go back to, 75 grand for all that spec. So why is it 75 grand? Why is this car so ridiculously cheap? To be honest, I don't really know, because it's certainly not because of its ability. This car is fantastic for that price. And to be honest, even if this was a 200 grand car like the Celica or the MRS, it would still be worth it in my opinion, because it's a very good car. The handling is superb on this model. The Silvia is typically known for being a good drifter, but this car doesn't drift at all. Now, of course, you can get it to step out around corners, but the grip is phenomenal on this model, and the fact that it does have less power than some of its rivals means that the car has less power, of course, to deal with, and therefore the chassis can cope much better, and the handling is much smoother, much more controlled, and much more forgiving than many of the other Super GT machines, even of the GT300 class. Now, the fact that it does have less power also does have, of course, disadvantages. Top-end performance, for example. But on most tracks, this car can keep up with pretty much any of the other GT300 models. Certainly the Celica and the MRS. It can also outrun the Subaru BRZ GT300 car, and it can even take on cars like the Goriya and even the RE Amamiya RX-7 in the GT300 class. So it's an amazing value for money car, and if you don't own any Super GT machines, and you're looking to get into that category of racing, this is pretty much the perfect place to start. It's GT300 class, which means it's easier to control, easier to get a hang of, and easier to use the power that you've got, but it's also that cheap price of 75,000 credits, meaning that buying your way into that category of racing doesn't have to be a multi-million-dollar expense, or multi-million credit expense. It's ridiculously cheap. Basically, you're paying sports car money for a racing car. That's a good deal. Now, around the track, as I said, it can keep up with pretty much any of the other GT300s. What about for the GT500 class? Well, the limited power does mean that on top-end tracks, such as here at Fuji or potentially Motegi or tracks like that, where you use more of your mid-range and especially top-end acceleration, it obviously is going to fall behind something like a Supra or a GTR. But on a twisty track, such as perhaps Suzuka or Tsukuba, or tracks like that where it's more about average speed rather than top speed, this car is a very, very good choice to go for. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, it's the only Silvia Super GT car, which makes it pretty unique as well. So, if you're looking for an affordable entry into the Super GT category, there's pretty much no better option than this one. So, that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.